Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my LEC Losers Finals or Semifinals or whatever you want to call it overview and analysis. Today, we are going to be checking out who is going to the LEC Grand Finals to take on G2. Obviously, two teams that have definitely worked their way to this point. One with a much harder road than the other, but still, both teams definitely earning their spot here in Losers Finals. But before we get into the analysis of the series that just ended, actually, as I'm recording this probably about 10-15 minutes ago, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of this series. Did it go as you expected? Did you expect the winner? Or did you not expect the winner? Did you expect it to be as, well, the way it was? Let me know all of that down in the comment section below. I don't want to spoil too much, but let me know if anything about this series surprised you down there. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into our analysis for Losers Finals. Now, obviously, two teams taking very different paths to get here, or, decently different paths, I should say, to get here. And in Losers Finals, we had the 2-seeded Rogue team coming down from winner's bracket to face the number 5-seeded Fnatic. Obviously, two very, very different teams throughout most of the season. Rogue, kind of this high floor, low ceiling team, at least that's how I have viewed them the entirety of the year. A team that I think very consistently takes advantage of teams' mistakes and very consistently is able to play to their strengths and be a good team and really take advantage of the bottom teams, but has never really felt like one of the teams that was going to push for being the best in the region. Got absolutely throttled by G2 in their series earlier in the week to come down here into Losers Finals. Definitely looking for a bounce back there. Fnatic, on the other hand, are as hot as they've ever been. This is a team that is immensely talented, and many people, me included, predicted them to be significantly higher in the standings after the regular season was over. But, man, this regular season was a problem. They end up 5th. They end up starting in the losers bracket. They have to make their way through Excel, through Misfits, through Mad Lions to make their way to this series. And here they are playing some of the best League of Legends that they have played as a team in the entire year. So two teams on very different trajectories, but both, I think, relatively equal in terms of skill level. So is Fnatic going to be able to continue the momentum, or is Rogue going to be able to show that they truly were the better team all along? We're going to find out game by game here, starting off with game number 1. And game number 1 was a Fnatic win. Fnatic is able to take the first one here, getting off to a really strong start in the series. This is something they've done very consistently throughout the series so far, or throughout the playoffs, I should say. Obviously, with the exception of the Excel series, but ever since Game 3 of the Excel series, Fnatic has really been an unstoppable force in these playoffs, only losing one game since then. And they definitely seem to have carried that momentum over into the beginning of the series with Rogue. Gotta point out a phenomenal game from Humanoid in the mid lane. This is somebody who I've been critical of, and I think a lot of people rightfully so have over the course of the year, because he really just has been not as advertised. He's a very aggressive player. We've always known that. His time on Mad Lions definitely showed that he likes to be the focal point. He likes to have the energy kind of put through him. He likes to have the focus in the mid lane, but he was really getting over-aggressive in a lot of the early games here, and Malrang was a jungler that was pretty consistently able to take advantage of early game problems. Humanoid and Razork, however, definitely getting more so on the same page recently, and that was very apparent in this game where Humanoid had a phenomenal game. Obviously, a great mid to late game from Humanoid on the Sylas pick here. Something that, honestly, I think accentuates a lot of his strengths. We've seen good games out of Humanoid on Sylas. We've still seen some bad ones, but for the most part, I think this is a champion that, when he is playing well, can be very consistent for this team. You pair that up with an early game jungler like Xin Zhao that's going to be able to generate a lot of those leads for Sylas as long as you play well. You're in a position to do a lot, especially into the Ahri, which I think you have a generally good matchup. Obviously, you can really deal with her one-on-one relatively well, but the big advantage of Ahri is her mobility and her roam pressure, at least in the mid game, especially with her jungler. But if you can beat her in the mid lane, usually Sylas has pretty good roam pressure in and of himself, and he can kind of get to those spots a little bit before Ahri as long as you are winning, and Humanoid did just that. He was able to generate that lead. Obviously, a little bit of that was on Larson, but a great play by Razork in the early game to flash over the ward and make sure that Larson does not see him coming in for the gank. Gets the Ahri flash, later sets up a Humanoid 1v1 in the mid lane that he wins. A solo kill for Humanoid that kind of just sets him off on this path of destroying and gathering gold and just becoming incredibly strong in this game. Overall, he was awesome, and really, when you're looking at players that really overachieved in this game, Humanoid has to come to mind. He's the player of the game in game number 1. He was phenomenal. Razork, like I said, really set up Humanoid well in the early game on the Xin Zhao. He has been genuinely phenomenal throughout the playoffs so far. Easily the best player in all of the LEC in the playoffs so far. He continues that trend here in game number 1 where he looks really good. You have Wonder here on the Ornn. I think that's a good pick for them overall. I think Ornn generally is just a good pick right now. It keeps your top laner safe while also giving him impact in the late game. And then you have Zeri Yuumi. Obviously, going into the Lucian Nami, that can be a little bit of a difficult matchup. But overall, as long as you get to the mid game at a relatively decent state, you're going to be able to scale, and Zeri is still going to be Zeri in the late game. So, really good game from Fnatic. Everything kind of fed through Humanoid in a good way here, where he was really able to be that central point for them to carry through, and then Razork doing a great job to enable that. As for Rogue, certainly not the game one that you wanted here. Obviously, getting destroyed by G2 was not great. Getting kind of beaten up here in game number 1 by Fnatic, also not great. A lot of misplays, I think, overall from a team that honestly doesn't have them all that often in the early game, where they're just kind of incredibly consistent. Maybe not the highest of highs, but very, very consistently fine. They really were not able to press their early game advantage that this team probably should have had. Obviously, the Xin Zhao into Vi matchup, I think, is pretty Xin Zhao favored, but outside of that, you've got the Aatrox and the Ornn. The Ornn can't really punish the Aatrox all that much, at least by himself. And then you've got Lucian Nami in the bot lane, which you have to invest into. This is something I've talked about a lot on the channel. A lot of teams pick Lucian Nami and then just kind of don't invest, let them get outscaled into the late game, and then they're not all that useful, and then they wonder why the bot lane isn't all that good, and I really just don't understand that idea. But all of this comes back to the jungle mid duo just kind of losing pretty hard. Like I said, Larssen getting solo killed in the mid lane after Razork burns his flash, not all that good. But Malrang just got completely out-pressured this game. Like, he was nowhere on the map in game number 1. He's going to get my dud of the game. I think you could realistically give this to Larssen on the Ahri as well. Again, just got beat by Humanoid, but Malrang looked embarrassed in this game. Not only from an engaged standpoint, where he was not effective in any plays that he tried to make, but even outside of that, like, he was so far behind the pace of the game, I think, for a majority of this. And Malrang's a jungler that can get into that position. He's very much a pace-dependent jungler, as I like to call it, in the sense of when the game state is being controlled by him, I think it can look very, very good for him. He can be an MVP candidate caliber player like he was in spring. When the game state is not being controlled by him, when the pace is instead being set by the other team, he can often get completely run over, and I think that's what happened in game number 1 here. But Malrang, Larssen definitely need to step up. If you're going to draft the Lucian Nami, you need to be able to play around that bot lane. And then Odo he was whatever in game number 1. Aatrox Ornn is boring. I can't really talk about the top lane. So overall, Rogue definitely needs to step it up here in game number 2, especially in the early game. Some really nice planning from Fnatic, but they're still a very inconsistent team early game. Razork and Humanoid have been able to be exploited throughout the majority of this split. They've gotten much better, but there definitely still are weaknesses from the two of them in the early game. Obviously, you don't want Upset and Hylissang to get to late. Hylissang can also be exploited as long as you don't give him the Yuumi. So certainly things that you can target on the side of Rogue, but you have to get a better performance out of your mid-jungle duo to do any of that. As for Fnatic, just keep the ball rolling. You have momentum upon momentum upon momentum right now. If Humanoid can play like this, if Razork's going to be setting him up, you're going to be in a really good spot to just be able to take the series pretty cleanly. So, are you going to be able to go up 2-0 as Fnatic here, or is Rogue going to tie up the series at 1-1? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Rogue. They are able to tie up the series 1-1 here. Big win. Obviously, you never want to go down 0-2 in a series. It's a little less important in this year's playoffs, obviously, with how many teams have been reverse swept, but still, going down 0-2 just puts you in such a hole to have to win 3 in a row. Rogue, though, tying everything up here at 1-1, really kind of flipping the script of the game. Like I said, they really needed to gain that control early, and so they go for a very, very aggressive comp. Not only do you go for the Renekton, you go for the Lucian Nami. Hell, even the Trundle is something that really wants to get the ball rolling early. Now, I'd usually be very hesitant to say, you know, to be positive about this comp, to be positive about a Renekton, Lucian Nami, that are just going to get outscaled if you do not dominate in the early game. But Rogue really has been at their best when they're able to control the pace of the game, and a lot of that can be done by generating early leads in the top lane, in the bot lane, making sure that you're able to rotate first to those objectives. So for most teams in the league, I think I would I would never recommend something like this, but For Rogue, I think it makes a little bit more sense, just genuinely for how they like to play. Comp is the kind of carry where in the late game, he can still do a lot on the Lucian, and then you put Larssen on Victor, you're still gonna have damage in the late game. It's not gonna be the same kind of damage that you would get from some of the other, like, main mid laners in the meta right now, but it's still going to be good enough, especially when you're going into another low damage mid laner in the Orianna on the other side. And so overall, I really kind of like what they did here, which is crazy for me to say because I would never think that I would like a Renekton Lucian Nami comp, but for Rogue in this particular circumstance, taking advantage of Fnatic's weaknesses, really trying to control the tempo, it very, very much worked for them because they have to rely on their players being able to win in the early game, and that's exactly what happened. We were talking about Malrang and Larssen getting blown back in game number 1 by some really good plays from Humanoid and from Razork. Well, the opposite was true in this game. Larssen was phenomenal in this game number 2. A resurgence from him. He's going to get my player of the game in game number 2 here. And this is kind of the Larssen that you're waiting to see. Obviously, Victor probably his best pick historically, or at least it has been over the past 2 years or so, I would say. And he goes back to it here, even though it's not like the most meta thing, and it's something I do criticize at times. I think it can definitely work into something like an Orianna. And definitely if you need that late game, like backline mage carry, I think something like the Victor could work in that scenario. Obviously, the Azir was banned out. That would really be the only other thing that I would theoretically consider in a situation like this over the Victor, but it definitely worked for Larssen. He played it really well here, and this is the dichotomy with Larssen. Obviously, I've talked about him on this channel quite a bit. I think I'm a bit lower on Larssen than the general consensus. I see a lot of people talking about him as a top 4-ish mid laner in the region. I just don't quite see him in that range. I think he's a very good player when he is winning. I think when he is on champions that he can really excel on, like the Victor, like the Azir, I think he can look really, really good as a mid laner, but we've seen throughout the split, he is very, very meta dependent. He is not good on a lot of the quote-unquote meta champions right now. Things like the Sylas, things like the Talia especially, that they have tried to force multiple times throughout the split. And that gives me hesitation with Larssen, where a lot of times he can just kind of be an average mid laner. But in this game, he was really able to get his comfort pick, and he was kind of the sole carry in the late game. And he was able to generate that early game lead anyways, because he was going into such a weak laner in Orianna. And so Larssen played really, really well on a comfort pick. I'm more comfortable with them going to this after they've shown me they can't really play meta. And so I'm kind of okay with it. Overall, good game from Larssen. Good game from Malrang. Really good comeback from him after getting completely outpaced in game number 1. He picks up the Trundle, decides to play a lot more aggro in the early game, which I think has always been a benefit for Rogue, and he does it really well. And then there's Odoamne, who I think completely styled on Wunder in the top lane. This Renekton into Aatrox matchup can actually be pretty Aatrox favored as long as things don't go incredibly bad in the early part of the game, I should say. And unfortunately for Wunder, it did. Malrang did give some attention to the top lane to Odoamne, making sure that Aatrox was never really in a position to have those quote-unquote flanks that he really wants. I know a lot of people are really down on the Aatrox pick. I actually do like the Aatrox pick generally, but you do have to be selective when you're picking it. This is a good matchup, but you can't be dying early, and Wunder just played too aggressive in the lane against Renekton. He knew he was going to scale against him. He knew this entire team was going to scale against him. Really not sure why he was giving that early aggro. So not a great game from Wunder, but Odo did play well. Comp and Trimby were fine. Comp definitely had some moments in this game that were questionable. Some overextensions where he gets caught out. We'll talk about upset in that same respect in just a bit, but overall, I would say they were fine. Trimby did play well on the Nami, but overall for Rogue, decent game. Definitely not a bad one. As for Fnatic, not a great loss here. I honestly think you outplayed yourselves in this game for the most part. Not going to say that Rogue was bad, but Fnatic kind of lost the game, I think, more than Rogue won it in this one, in my opinion. You got to give a lot of blame to Wunder, like I said, on that Aatrox pick. As long as you don't die in the early game, as long as you go relatively even, you're going to outscale the Renekton. You basically do his job, but better in the late game, and so you just have to you have to make sure he doesn't get gold, and unfortunately, Odoamne did get a lot of gold. He outplayed Wunder in this game, enough so for me to give Wunder the dud of the game here, although I think there are definitely some other options for that. Razork and Humanoid definitely got outplayed in their respective roles, not nearly as much as I think Malrang and Larssen did in the flip side of game number 1, but they definitely didn't have an advantage. Razork was relatively irrelevant in the early game in comparison to Malrang's aggressive Trundle pick here, and then the Ori just has zero lane pressure. I've been talking about it all split. Really, Jensen is the only player in pretty much any region that I've seen be able to pull off Ori to any level of success, and that's because he just forgoes laning phase almost entirely plays almost entirely with Blabber in the jungle. And so definitely not a pick that I would recommend a lot of people go to. I think it's very, very weak in the meta right now, but if you want to play it, you want to play it. And then Upset and Hylissang, where definitely some moments in this game. Upset had some really weird plays, a game-losing play. Not that they were really in it in the first place, but they had some dragons. They had some gold. They were in a potential spot for Zeri to be able to kind of take over some team fights, but the positioning late game by Upset was super uncharacteristic for him. This is someone who I think has been incredibly consistent over the course of the year in terms of making sure that late game impact is pretty good. I know obviously this laning phase can get a little dicey in the bot lane for Fnatic sometimes, but late game has usually been the positive part of the game for Fnatic, and it was certainly not in this one overall. So Upset, not great in this one. Wonder, not great in this one. Overall, you just got to get back to what you were doing in game number 1. It really feels like Rogue, it's all about Rogue in this series in the sense of if Rogue controls the tempo, they're going to be able to play their game, they're going to be able to do the things they want, and they just have simply better macro and better decision-making, better positioning than Fnatic. I don't think they're quote-unquote better mechanically, but they're better as a team, I think, in those coordinated efforts from ahead than Fnatic are playing from behind. And so if they can generate that advantage, I think Rogue's going to be in a good spot. But Fnatic, as we saw in game number 1, if they can just get that one play, they really can snowball it out of control. Rogue has to lose grip of the wheel, and if they do that, Fnatic is in a really good spot to be able to drive the rest of the game. So, who is going to be able to do that in a very important game number 3 here? Obviously, winner going up 2-1, you definitely want to be the team in that spot and not the team that has to win 2 in a row. So, who won game number 3? Well, the winner was Rogue. They are able to take game number 3 and pick up a big 2-1 series lead here in this one, and this was definitely a better game than game 2. Now, obviously, game 2 wasn't a bad one, but I think you just had so much control in this game off of the back of a really strong early game into just a phenomenal combo in the back half of this game. Now, some of these picks I've criticized in the past, in the past like 4 minutes. I'm going to talk about it in a more positive light here, but that's more so the surrounding scenario. I still don't think they're all that good. I'm namely talking about the Orianna for Larssen in the mid lane. I still think that Orianna is a weak pick, especially in laning phase. It's just really something that you can take advantage of if you have an enemy jungler that wants to try and take advantage of it. Unfortunately, you pick the Poppy, and if there's any lane that's the hardest to gank as Poppy, it's the mid lane. There's the least amount of walls to knock someone into. So unless you really set up a good dive opportunity, Razork's not going to have a ton of opportunities, especially with Victor here, to be able to capitalize on that. And while Humanoid was able to generate a decent lead, enough so where they were able to get some dragon pressure towards the early part of the game in exchange for pretty much everything else on the map. But Larssen was so good in the back half of this game because they drafted the freaking Soraka. They did it. And I'm so happy because I've been talking about it on this channel so much. I've been talking about Soraka. Picks like Janna, I think, fall into this category as well of things that I just don't understand why they're not picked more in the current meta. Soraka comes out here in game number 3 for Trimby, and he was awesome on it. Not only was he awesome on it, this Soraka pick does so much towards the back half of this game. The combo of Orianna Shockwave, like pulling people all together into the silence from Soraka, can completely destroy an entire team. And we saw that once in this game where it hit quite a few members of Fnatic. They all immediately got silenced, and they had absolutely no answer to an Ornn coming in, to, Zeri on the backline, Trundle. There's so much coming out from this Rogue side that combo in the back half was awesome, but really, I guess you could say that a lot of this game was about the bot lane for Rogue. They were able to generate a considerable lead themselves in the early game, mostly due to Soraka just having a ton of lane prio, and also due to Hylissang, which we'll get to in a bit, but they were able to generate that lead. They were able to translate that into a lot of late game pressure, even if it didn't immediately translate into early game dragon pressure. They were able to eventually get online, and then like I said, you have that big combo with Ori, Soraka, then you have Ornn going in, maybe with the Ornn ult to knock everybody up, and you have Zeri doing damage on the backline through all of this. Like, it's unreal how good this is, especially when the rest of the team gets ahead. And it worked basically to perfection. Trimby's going to get my player of the game here on the Soraka. Like I said, that champ is just so good in the late game if you can get there at a relatively even clip. And we've seen it multiple times from multiple teams in the LEC here over the course of the playoffs that when Soraka is put in a good scenario, I mean, she can absolutely dominate a game. And Trimby, I thought, played her really, really well here in game number 3. But a lot of credit to Trimby, a lot of credit to Comp, I think, for, capitalizing on a lot of the opportunities that the Soraka and the Orianna offered him up. But Big credit to Odoamne in the top lane. Continues to just outplay Wonder in the 1v1 here. He gets the Ornn into Gangplank matchup. This is something I think both players are going to be very familiar with for multiple years of this being a very meta top lane matchup. And, you know, I get the idea of it. Ornn scales really well, so you want to pick something that scales with him, but can also relatively pressure him out in the early game. Gangplank can kind of do that to an extent, but you got to be good enough. And especially on Gangplank right now, where I think he's in a state where he's not going to, like, dominantly win a lane matchup, even if you don't have a lot of competition. Like, Ornn's not really someone that's going to fight back super easily. Like, you still have to play the Gangplank well, and I just don't think Wonder has been all that good in this series so far. Odo comes back out on top in this matchup here. Malrang does spend some time up in the top lane, making sure that Wonder is in a really precarious spot, and they're able to completely shut him down. Wonder really needs to step it up if this series is going to be relatively even for the rest of, you know, hopefully for the next 2 games, but maybe for the next 1 if Wonder keeps playing like this. Like, he really has to just not be a liability for this team, which obviously we've seen him be a couple of times through the regular season. He's kind of that yin and yang, because there are times where he's incredibly influential, and he's probably still the best team fighting top laner in the region, but the early laning phase has been an issue for him, and Odo is someone who is definitely willing to call jungle attention and exploit that, and Rogue have definitely shown to have that pretty consistently. So good game from Odo, and a really good game from Comp and Trimby overall. As for Fnatic, boy, you're going down 1-2 now, and this felt like regular season Fnatic again. Like, this game felt very reminiscent of regular season Fnatic, where it's just like mistake after mistake. Like, Hylissang being super aggressive on the Lulu for absolutely no reason, flashing past his AD carry without ultimate in order to try and engage, and just immediately dying. Like, completely unsalvageable play there. But even outside of that, just like being over-aggressive, being in a position where his ADC can't really follow up, and just not really understanding the lane state. They were behind really early on because Hylissang couldn't stop dying. Like, it was actually pretty insane. This is one of the worst games he's had in quite a while, and that's saying something. Like, he's had some pretty bad games in the regular season, but this one was particularly not good, especially considering the stakes. He's a pretty easy choice for dead of the game in game number 3. You hope to see a better version of Hilly later in the series, but Wonder in the top lane as well. I already talked about it for a good amount, so I'll be quick here, but just needs to step it up. Needs to not be this. Needs to not be a lane liability that can be taken advantage of by constant jungle attention, because Rogue is a team that will show you that they are willing to take advantage of that. And Wonder on this Gangplank, I just don't think this is the right kind of idea for the direction that Fnatic should want to go in. You want to go for something, I think, a little bit more passive in the top lane so that you can make sure that someone like Humanoid and Upset can get online. They've really been the big pieces in the playoffs, even if they weren't in the regular season. Make sure Razork is on a facilitator, something that can control the pace in the early game, and then make sure that Humanoid and Upset can win you the game, and hopefully, I mean, you know, for the love of God, just get Hylissang on Yuumi. I know it's banned, but, like, whatever you have to do, if you have to pay off Rogue to let it through, like, it's the only pick that he doesn't run it on anymore, and so whatever you can do to get that pick, like, absolutely get it. Other than that, just hope and pray that Hilly doesn't lose you the game in the bottom lane. But for Rogue, just keep doing this. Like, this was a really good early game. Again, they had a really good strategy of being able to take advantage of Fnatic's weaknesses. That's kind of been Rogue's MO throughout the whole season, taking advantage of weaknesses. Now, I'm still a little concerned about this team's ability to generate offense without that, but they're still really solid, and you know, they're in a pretty good position to take down this Fnatic team in 4 games, as long as they continue this run. But Fnatic has the talent to be able to turn this around. We saw game number 1 was probably the most dominant game in the series. Fnatic looked really solid in game number 1. If they can just get that form back, they should be able to stay in the series. So, are Fnatic able to keep the series alive here in game number 4, or is Rogue going to be able to close it out and bring us to a winners finals rematch in grand finals? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Rogue. They are able to take game number 4 and take the series 3-1, moving on to grand finals here. And really, I think, shocking a lot of people with how unbelievably clean this game number 4 was. This was easily their best game of the series. While I could sit here and talk about how games 2 and 3 were pretty good for them, especially game 3, where I think they definitely had a lot of the momentum and were able to take advantage of the Fnatic mistakes, I think in this one they really just created everything. They held every single card in the game, and they used them to completely obliterate this Fnatic team. So what exactly happened? Well, Rogue went back to the game 2 strategy of, what if we invest entirely into early game? But this time, instead of having a Victor to be able to carry a lot of your late game damage, you have an Orianna, which is just more support for the early game carries that basically have to get fed in this game because you don't have that secondary damage source, I think, coming out from the mid lane. Yes, Ori can do damage, but not nearly to the extent that someone like a Victor or that, other mid lane carries can do. Azir on the other side. So you really had to generate that lead early. And boy, how did they generate that lead? Malrang with a phenomenal game here on the Jarvan. This has been his best pick by far over the course of the split. I've talked about how I don't love Jarvan. Right now, I just think he's a little bit squishier than I would like for someone who goes in, and that's kind of his role. But holy crap, like Malrang played this so aggro in such a good way. He was able to create so much on the map for basically everybody. Not only did he completely control the top lane matchup here, where Wonder got completely roasted again on this Renekton-Aatrox matchup that, in my opinion, again, is still relatively Aatrox favored as long as you can go neutral. Not only was he able to completely out-jungle Razork here on the Sejuani, doing what I've been telling teams to do all year long, which is when you're playing against Sejuani, just go, go, go in the early game. Try to get as many ganks off pre-6 as possible, because if she gets to her late game spike, she's going to be very impactful if she can create that early game advantage. And then you got Lucian Nami in the bot lane, just use them. And boy, like, did it work in this series. Malrang controlled pretty much every facet of this game, making sure that Wonder, Upset, Humanoid, Razork, all of them were behind and all of them were in the palm of Malrang's hands. This goes back to what I was saying kind of in game number 1, where it was like, Malrang's the kind of jungler where I think, when he's not controlling the pace of the game, he can definitely get a little bit lost and get a little bit behind the pace and the flow of what everything is going on. But when he is in control, when he is the guy here in the jungle, when he has that aggression, there's almost no better jungler in the LEC. It's just about the consistency with him. But when you get this, like, this was dominant. And more Jarvan, please, if this is how he plays Jarvan. He plays Jarvan like it's friggin' Elise out there. Like, it's actually insane how aggressive early on he is with this champion, but it very much works for Rogue's playstyle. Gotta give a lot of credit to Odo Omne for, again, just getting the better of Wonder. Like, Odo versus Wonder was my key matchup of the series. Odo crushed him. Like, this was the most lopsided lane of all of them in the entire series. Odo absolutely obliterated Wonder every single game, and that's kind of been a little bit of an issue for Fnatic. I'm not really sure what they're going to be able to do to overcome that if Wonder isn't on that level come Worlds, but we'll talk about them in a bit. And then Comp and Trimby. Big shout out to the Lucian Nami for finally getting ahead in this series. Trimby was awesome in the series just in general. Comp was really consistent, I think, overall. Never really was, like, the guy, and definitely makes some positioning mistakes throughout the series, but still, a good game overall from him on the Lucian. Was able to get enormously fed off the back of this Jarvan. And the Nami, obviously, just pushing everything into him. Even the Orianna, at multiple points, just pushing everything into him, and he was able to do so much damage in this game. But honestly, I wasn't really all that, like, stunned by Comp this series. He was fine. He was a good player. And then Larson, I thought, actually played this series really well after a really bad game number 1. Goes on the Orianna in games 3 and 4, and often I would say I wouldn't like that pick, but again, talking about Larson's champion pool, he's not really the one to play a lot of the meta champions, like the Sylas, like the Taliyah. And so, if control mages really are going to be your thing, Victor, obviously, I would prefer. Azir, I would obviously prefer, but Orianna's really not that bad of a third. She still offers a lot of supportive things, and the Shockwave is always going to be useful, even if your damage really isn't all that good right now. Like, you're still able to do things. You're just not really able to generate that lead by yourself. But again, if that's what you feel comfortable on, I always talk about this comfort over meta any day of the week, as long as your comfort is playable. And I do think Ori is playable. She does offer something. We've seen that in the LCS with Cloud9 being able to use her to get to finals. Obviously, Rogue here doing the same with Larson. Very good series from him. Overall, awesome series from Rogue. We'll get back to them in a bit, but Fnatic is now out. Their dream, their miracle playoff run has come to an end here in Losers Finals, but that's top 3 for a team that very much did not feel like they were within range of that throughout most of the year. Yes, the back half of the series wasn't all that promising, but I do think there are still a lot of good takeaways. Razork was phenomenal throughout the playoffs, and no, he wasn't good in this game, but he was phenomenal throughout the playoffs. Humanoid really felt like he got his groove back. Again, another really bad game from him in game number 4 here, but throughout the playoffs, it really felt like we were getting the better version of Humanoid. Hopefully, you're getting that version at Worlds. The things you need to look to see improve. Wonder, obviously, is going to get my dud of the game in game number 4 here. I don't give out dud of the series in playoffs, but I bet you guys can guess who my dud of the series would be in the series if I could give it out. But overall, he just needs to get better at being a weak side option. Like, he was really bad at that in this series. It was something that was incredibly punishing for this Fnatic team. There were a lot of times where Razork wanted to invest in Humanoid. He wanted to invest in Upset. and he left Wunder on that island, and Malrang was really able to take advantage of that because Wunder was not playing safe. He was not respecting the fact that he didn't have a lot of protection, and he was getting punished over and over and over again for it, not to mention just the fact that he got outplayed by Odo in the 1v1. He definitely needs to step it up. He wasn't really a big carry piece for this team in the playoffs. He was in the regular season at points, definitely during team fights, but definitely want to see more out of Wunder, just generally speaking. And then Hylissang. You know, we can talk about Hylissang and how he's a very feast or famine player, and obviously you're going to get the good and the bad with Hylissang, but at the end of the day, you still need him to go out and give you the good, and it just feels like that's happening less and less and less over the course of this split. You really hope that he can turn that around over the break or whatever it is before Worlds, because you really need him to be that guy for this team to have any shot at making it out of groups at Worlds or even out of play-ins. Obviously, this team is now a play-ins team, which is good and bad for them, but we'll talk about that more when we do Worlds analysis. But Upset really relies on Hylissang in lane to generate a lot. Upset's obviously a very good player in the late game, but he's not a very dominant laner. He relies on Hylissang to create a lot of that for him. If Hylissang is being bad, like he was in the past few games, it's just not going to work for Fnatic. So overall, definitely some things that they need to improve on, but I would consider this playoff run a complete success for a team that I think was very lucky to even make playoffs in the first place, had to basically win out in the final week of the season to even put themselves in this spot, and then going on a miracle playoff run, getting that reverse sweep against Excel. They could have been out in that first series, then just dominating Misfits, completely destroying them in that sweep, and then really just being the better team against Mad Lions. A lot of really, really good things from Fnatic to take away in this playoff run. It just happened to come down to a pretty bad end here, but I definitely think this team can rebound as long as they start focusing on some of their weaknesses. As for Rogue, you now move on to Grand Finals. You get your rematch with G2. We've seen this series multiple times throughout the year. G2 has gotten the better of them quite a bit, but Rogue definitely showed some good things here. I think that they at least have a mentality where they can play well against G2, and more importantly, I think they have now officially qualified for the group stage at Worlds, which I think is a very, very good thing for this team. No play-ins, you don't have to worry about any of that, especially with play-ins being weird this year. I imagine there's going to be groups of 3. That's kind of how I would imagine. That's how it was before. Obviously, we had some pullouts last year due to COVID restrictions and everything, and so, you know, I would imagine that we're going to get multiple groups of 3, and that means that there's going to be one top seed from or one major region with another major region in their group, you know, that LEC 4th seed being a second tier, like, quote-unquote play-in team, and so to not even have to worry about, like, messing around with that, I think is pretty good for Rogue overall, and the fact that they're just going to be slotted straight into group stage has to be positive for this team. Now, I'll get into my thoughts on them in the finals in a bit, but overall, really good series from them. Trimby is going to get my player of the series here. He's actually been someone who I think has really impressed me throughout the course of the playoffs. He's someone who I think I was a little lower on than maybe public opinion over the course of the regular season. I always thought he was a good support. I never thought he was a great support, but he's really pulled out a lot of the enchanter stops throughout the playoffs here, and I've been more impressed with him than I think I had been in previous years in terms of how he has played, in terms of taking over the game from that support role. Obviously, the Soraka game was awesome, but even this Nami game here in game number 4 was very impressive, and I think he's pulled out quite a few of these at this point in the playoffs. So Trimby's going to get my player of the series. He continues to improve, in my opinion, and Odo was a very close second. He absolutely dominated this series overall. Really, really good for Rogue, but you got to be excited if you're this Rogue team. You're going to be making another finals here, and that's got to be a success for this organization. Alright, well that is going to do it for my LEC Losers Finals or Semifinals, whatever you want to call it, overview and analysis. Obviously, we've got one more series left in the LEC, our Grand Finals between G2 and Rogue, a rematch of Winners Finals that went very, very heavily in favor of G2. If you want to see my in-depth thoughts on how these two teams match up against each other, you can check out the video that's up in the iCard right now where I go into depth, you know, role by role against each other, how they stack up, as well as my key matchup of the series. All of that remains relatively similar here moving into the finals, but where do I think both of these teams stand? Well, Rogue definitely has more confidence, I think, now than they did going into their Winners Finals game, but G2 is honestly just on a different level. If I had to make a prediction, G2 3-0, G2 3-1, I usually give a 2-game spread. That's my 2-game spread here, is I think this should be very, very favorably in the side of G2. They are so clearly the best team in Europe. I don't even think it's really all that close. I know we talk about Europe as being like this big step up, but really I think the middle tier of Europe took a pretty big step back this year overall. I think G2 is still a pretty good team, maybe a top 7, 8 team in the world, but I think they're a pretty big tier above a team like Rogue, at least at this point. Obviously, Rogue might be able to surprise, but especially with what we saw out of them in the previous series. I don't really give them a ton of, like, I think they're a team that can beat teams that they're better than. They can exploit mistakes, they can exploit weaknesses, but they're not someone that's going to be able to create a lot of advantages, I think, against teams that are better and are able to push the tempo a lot quicker against them. G2 is one of those teams, and I would expect G2 to have a pretty easy time here, but let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you think that G2 should be able to steamroll the series, to snowball it basically out of control? Or does Rogue have a fighting chance here, maybe more so than they did in Winners Finals, now that they have the confidence of beating Fnatic on their side? Of course, let me know all that down in the comment section below. And while you're down there, you might as well hit the like button. Obviously, we put a lot of effort into these videos. If you are enjoying them, it really does mean a lot if you hit that like button. And if you want to see more of this content, obviously, we got LEC stuff coming out, we got LCS stuff coming out, and then Worlds is right around the corner. We're going to be doing a ton of predicted stuff when it comes to Worlds, as well as Worlds coverage once it kicks off. So if you want to see all that stuff, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. We're going to be putting out a ton of stuff. So if you are excited for that, would love it if you hit that subscribe button. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.